Welcome to Greengate Organic Farm. We're a farm that primary role is to provide an opportunity for training, but we run Greengate Farm as a business. We have students come to study organic farming, agroecology and permaculture from all over the world, and this farm is the centre of that. The farm is about 190 hectares just north of Albury. We produce lamb, pastured pork, free-range eggs, vegetables, herbs, olive oil, mushrooms and a few other things as well that we sell out of our farm shop here at Thaguna. Behind us here you can see some of our free-range chickens. So these guys are rotating around the farm with their chicken caravans. They need to harvest the equivalent of 2 medium-sized grasshoppers a day to get the protein they need to lay an egg. And so part of the farm system is set up so that we're producing invertebrates for those chickens to harvest to turn into eggs for our customers. You can hear Smiley, our guardian dog. He's just in his apprenticeship now, learning the ropes, and he lives all 24/7 with the chickens and protects them from the foxes. He does a great job already. He's probably not even 2 years old yet, but he's doing a great job. The chickens move from paddock to paddock to paddock depending on the level of protein they're getting out of the paddock. They tell us that when they start to move further away from their chicken caravans. Once they start to move 50 or so metres away, and they're more than 50 metres away now, that's a trigger for us to realise that protein's getting hard to find in the paddock and it's time to move on to the next paddock. We use older breeds of chickens. You can see they're mostly white Sussex behind us with a few other things mixed up as well. We've found through experience that the older breeds are much better at foraging and getting that protein out of the system rather than waiting around for us to give them a bucket of feed. They produce less eggs than the higher bred layers do, but in a low input system like we have here, that's not such a big drama. Our input costs into these chickens aren't particularly high. What will be happening over the next day or so, we'll be moving the chicken caravans to the next paddock. We'll probably expect to see the production of eggs go up in response to the increase in protein in their feed. And then as they start to take the protein out of the system, we'll see the eggs start to trail off again and it'll be time to move. We might go and have a look at the chicken caravans now. And we've got our old chicken caravans that we're still using here. We're in the process of designing and building a new one. These old ones here have probably been in use for about 12 years, I think. The chickens roost in them overnight, lay their eggs in them and then move on. They need to be mobile so we can chase those 2 grasshoppers a day, but they also need to be mobile because if you don't keep them moving, the chickens bond to the landscape rather than the shed and start laying their eggs under the trees and in the tussocks rather than the egg boxes, and then that's a problem for our production system. These chicken caravans here will manage about 50 to 60 chickens each, and we're required to meet the organic certification specifications for floor size and perch length and nest box availability and stuff like that. Another part of the farm system is our paddock raised pork. You can see Rosie and her recent litter behind us there, Berkshire pigs, little black pigs. We can't use the pink pigs because they get sunburn outside all the time, but also Berkshires are less highly bred for length of loin and stuff like that, so they're a bit more able to forage a bit better and around the paddock. So these, just like the chickens, these pigs move from paddock to paddock to paddock, harvesting protein and energy out of our system. Our chickens are harvesting the invertebrates. Our pigs here are harvesting stuff from underneath the ground, roots, bulbs, grubs, and then we do some supplementary feeding with soaked grain depending on the season and things like that. So Rosie here is just cleaning up the last bit of soaked triticale she had for breakfast this morning. The chickens and the pigs rotate through about 50 paddocks. They're all very, very small paddocks, but that's a trick for us to be able to manage pigs. If we keep pigs on the same piece of landscape for very long, they will continue to plough it up and eventually turn it into a desert. So even though we've got 50 paddocks, we only have 2 sows. Look at producing between 40 and 50 piglets a year for our farm shop. Any more than that and we start to really have an impact on the health of our soil ecosystem. Soils naturally turn over, so that's fine, but if we continually turn it over, we'll end up breaking down the soil structure, changing the plant communities and all that sort of stuff. Rosie and her piglets will move to the next paddock and then to the one after, and slowly we'll take 1 or 2 of the piglets out as they reach a weight, have them processed and sell through the farm shop as well. Because they're rotating from paddock to paddock, there's very little health issues and very, very little issues around managing them because they don't feel like they have to escape anywhere. So we don't tend to have that much trouble with pigs pushing through fences or damaging and stuff like that. We've got electric fences and there's electric wire across the gate there, but they're not a great priority for us because we move all the time. Here we are at the end of the laneway on Greengate Farm, where as the crow flies we're only about 500 metres where we had a look at our chicken caravans a while ago, but it's taken about 2 kilometres to get here. Coming around Greengate Farm's a bit like driving around Canberra because we've designed the farm very, very carefully around the contours and the ridges of the landscape. Our laneways all follow the contours, and if we have to change contours they come down a ridge line, which we've just done now. It's hard to see in a flattish landscape like this, but we're on a ridge that's sitting slightly above the rest of the land around us. And the reason why the laneway finishes here is because this is where the ridge finishes. And you can see it branches off into a number of paddocks behind us. The laneways are critical to the way we manage Greengate Farm. The major reason is because it protects our soil structure and our healthy soil ecosystems, but it also makes it a lot easier on our animals as we move them around, our chickens and our dogs and our pigs and our sheep. They can move from one paddock to the other easily, and it's also good for our sanity as well, as it's very, very simple to move around the farm and move our animals around as well. So here we are in the paddock at the end of the laneway. You'll notice that right beside me here is a water trough. We've got these water troughs in every one of our paddocks on the farm. It's a critical part of our management. Now, one critical part of that is the placement of the trough. Because it's a trough, it means that with 150 or 200 sheep in the paddock, on a really hot summer's day, they can drain that trough really quickly. So we need to be right on top of the fact that the trough's always got water in it, and that's simple if the troughs are all nearby to the laneway. So our laneway is, the water travels around that on the contour and on the ridge lines, as I explained, and gravitates out to these troughs. And we just, as we're driving around the farm and the laneway, we can check the water as we go. We've got 6 dams on the farm, but all of those have been fenced out to protect the water quality and habitat, but also to protect the animals from drinking poor quality water in the summer. Each one of our paddocks is carefully designed so that as much as possible it's a good environment for animals to live in. We're in a part of the farm here that's quite flat and open. There's a creek line about 100 odd metres away, but there's not much creek cover in this area. So each one of these paddocks has what we call a boomerang in them. What they are is we made a little wetland, and you might see the bank of that wetland in the background there. That bank's there for a purpose. It's outside the fence that fences out the wetland, because that's a dry area where our sheep can sit when it's wet, because sheep don't like wet feed at all. It's unhealthy for them. There's a wetland for our endangered frog species, but that's a boomerang shaped fence there, so that it doesn't matter what direction the wind's going, the sheep can tuck in behind the bank if they want to, or behind the trees to get shade or shelter from the wind. We're now in a paddock where our sheep mob is, just like the pigs and the chickens. They're rotating around all the 50 paddocks on the farm. That rotation has got enormous benefits for 1,000 reasons. I'll try and explain the most important ones, but before I do, I should mention that the breed of sheep here we use are Damaras, which are African fat-tail sheep. There's a number of reasons why we use those. First off, they don't require shearing, and so that's a joy for a start. But also we produce, because we're selling out of a farm shop, we need to have lambs ready all year round. And now if we used other breeds of sheep, let's say a Dorset for example, it'd be very, very hard for us not to have sheep over-fatted, lambs over-fatted stages through the year. And that's the same for Dorpers as well. Dorpers are another fat-tail sheep, but they're basically developed from a cross between, you know, an English breed like a Dorset and African sheep like Damaras. So these sheep store their fat in their tail like a camel does in its hump, and so they're never quite over fat. So our loin chops, when we sell to our customers, are still okay and don't require trimming. We have to produce lambs all year round, so we don't have a standard lambing time. The rams are coming in and out of the flock just to maintain a constant flow of lambs through the year. Now the sheep will stay in the sheep got in this paddock earlier this morning, about an hour and a half ago, and they'll stay in here for a maximum of 4 days. Now that means that depending on the year, some of our paddocks are still too big, and this paddock is one of those. The idea of rotational grazing is to make sure that you have enough grazing pressure that the sheep eat everything in the paddock, because if we don't eat everything in the paddock, then we'll get stuff that the sheep don't like eating starting to dominate the pasture. But the reason why we can only leave them in 4 days is because that's the length of time it takes for a worm egg to hatch and infect back on the grass again. And because we're certified organic, so we don't use drenches or anything like that, we use our rotation to manage the parasites on the sheep. By leaving them only in 4 days, and then they're rotating through 50 paddocks for 4 days, so another couple of 100 days before they're back again, that means that the population of worm eggs in the paddock has dropped down to next to nothing. And so we don't need to worry about pest control at all in our sheep. We don't vaccinate, drench, do anything like that at all. They just go from one paddock to the other. It might be a bit hard to see at this distance, but there's also alpacas in here for fox protection, and also there's a donkey in here, Barbara, who is here for dog protection. We're on the outskirts of town, and when we first started here back in the mid-90s, we were losing lots and lots of sheep every year with their throats ripped out by town dogs coming out overnight and attacking the sheep. We were losing maybe 20 or 30 a year. In the year 2000, we got our first guardian donkey, Barbara, and we've only lost one sheep since in that whole time. And that was when Barbara wasn't in the paddock with the sheep one night. So these are really easy sheep. We're not shearing, we're not crutching, we're not vaccinating, we're not drenching. All we're doing is opening the gate to the next paddock and on they move. That has benefits for the sheep, but it has benefits for the pasture as well. When we first started here, our soil organic matter was really, really low, almost non-existent, because of set stocking and overgrazing and just, bad management over the length of time that agriculture had been here. As soon as we started rotational grazing, we started to see a difference. I'm standing in about 6 or 7 inches of pasture growth here in August, which is pretty good for us. But there's the equivalent amount of roots underneath as well. And the more green we can grow on top, the more brown roots we can grow underneath. And the longer the rotation is, the more roots grow. And when the sheep come back here in 150, 200 days time on their next rotation, they'll eat all this vegetation down again, right down to the ground. All the roots will die back, and that's all instant soil organic matter in place. And that's driven our organic matter levels on this farm from nothing up to pretty significant levels in the time we've been here. This paddock here was compacted and full of Patterson's curse and nothing else when we started. We don't spray, we don't fertilisers, we don't do anything else other than rotational graze, and this is the result that's happened because of it. Our primary job on the farm here is to grow biomass. And in the case of this paddock here, I'm standing in, the biomass we're growing is what we'd normally consider pasture, and we've set up the farm system to turn that biomass into food for people. So our sheep are harvesting the green part of this biomass and turning it into lamb chops. Our pigs are harvesting the roots and grubs part of this biomass and turning it into pork chops. And our chickens are harvesting the invertebrate part of this biomass and turning it into eggs. So the focus for us here is not necessarily having one or two highly prized plants in the pasture, but having as big a variety of plants as we possibly have. You may have noticed, but there's no such thing as a weed on Greengate Farm. We're not going to do it today, but the way we move our stock is by calling Barbara the donkey. Now she knows when it's time to move to the next paddock. All the sheep fall in behind, and you can see the sheep starting to fall in behind her now, and they follow her off to the next paddock. No need for a sheepdog or a motorbike.